So I'm so excited to welcome our next guest, the fabulous Estelle Levin-Nally from Levin Sources. Estelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sarah. Fabulous is very generous. I try. Doesn't always happen. I'm Estelle Levin-Nally, and I'm the CEO and founder of Levin Sources. And we're a social venture that builds sustainable, valuable, and equitable mineral sectors and supply chains.
Fabulous. Excellent. So given that, Estelle, I'm really looking forward to your answer to question number one, which is, what do you feel a just energy transition actually is?
Right. So a just energy transition has the word just in it. So I think we have to think of it from the lens of justice. And when I think about just sustainability, actually, I think about justice, and I think about environmental justice and social justice. And I think about it across space and across time, between generations. So, for example, I think a just transition means that we manage to evolve the world from practices, behaviors, and ways of living that are destructive and harmful to cultural and environmental heritage and to the potential of future generations to have the same opportunities in terms of a kind of natural resource base and a cultural base for making their lives as prosperous and comfortable as possible and finding meaning. So for me, it's about reconciling injustices that exist between people today across space, but between people across space and across time, so between now and future generations, but also between us and nature, because we are of nature, of course, but we seem to somehow still think that we're above it and we can control it and manipulate it. And in little corners of it, we obviously can, but we're beginning to be proven that we're not so great at that. And these big systems that we exist within are bigger than we can actually really control. You push the balloon in one end, it pushes at the other end. From an environmental justice point of view, we need to reconcile the fact that we are of it and that we are not the only thing that matters. Nature has its intrinsic value. I believe that there should be rights for nature, because I also believe it's about helping any form of life that could have to be as resilient as possible in the face of change, right? I don't think we need to fight to defend every species necessarily, but I think that we need to fight the possibility for species to be resilient. And I don't think we can just also be comfortable with not just creating extinctions, but actually creating the suffering, particularly for higher sentient beings, that comes with the pressures we put on them and their ecosystems. I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay, so with that then, Estelle, because it really is fascinating. So we're getting lots of different answers to that question around what is actually meant by just transition, and some people feel it's mostly around with this transition, lots of people will lose their jobs, so it's mostly around
yes,
that.
Of course, that's the main thing that people talk about.
Yeah, but do you feel, I mean, that it's much broader than that? So perhaps the opportunity that we've got, because we've got this change happening at the moment, is actually to go look at, it's not just about the jobs, it's actually about society through time and space, and then on into the broader environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, because the just transition is the outcome, right, of efforts to change us, to take us off the track that we're on, that leads us to really unsustainable ways of living, are destructive of things that have value for humanity and for other species, and put us into ways of living and being and doing and prospering that actually is less destructive and is more constructive and more nurturing. Now, the reason that's embedded for me is because you've got to ask yourself, why are we doing it? This transition isn't just to build economic opportunity, though it's there. It's being done to help us mitigate and avoid climate change and the worst impacts of climate change that are here now and are going to be coming for people and for ecosystems and other species, right? So when you think about the why, it does bring you into higher philosophical questions about what matters, and what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be on Earth and to be part of this story, and how we impact on others. And it's always been really important to me, and this is why I built Levin Sources, that every night when I go to bed, I can think, I did something today that has helped make somebody else's life better, and has contributed positively to either protecting others or enhancing them to be the best they can be. For me, that's what it's all about. So I'm, for me, I interpret the just transition through those lenses.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I think then with that, so I mean, both of us, I mean, we work within the mining sector, we work with other sectors as well. But from, sort of taking that that perspective with regards to the just transition, which is absolutely fantastic. And then saying, okay, so what is the role of the mining sector within that just transition? Where do you think that comes in?
Well, yeah, it's really crucial. Like, we can't, the just transition means largely defossil fueling us, right? And dematerializing processes and systems through which we can become more efficient, less wasteful, for the same positive measure of outcome, whatever that is, of output, whether that's measured in an economic sense of pound or a socio-cultural sense in terms of value felt, right, or experience. So the mining industry, it can't transition to green power, green motion without the minerals that would make that possible, that go into those hardwares. We can't digitize or become AI enabled without the metals and minerals that go into the hardware for computing and things like this. So there just isn't enough recyclability yet, meaning that there are some metals that you have to have raw feedstocks as part of their reprocessing and smelting after being recycled. We haven't got enough products designed for being, or it's not normalized yet for product design to think of end of life and repurposing of those components or the product into components that can then be dismantled into the pieces that can be recyclable. Actually, within our recycling systems, we have, even just for domestic use at the moment, I mean, the bags of recycling that end up in landfill anyway, because our systems aren't perfect yet. So we're just really far from being able to satisfy the demand that is going to come, or is coming now with this just transition, from recycled alone. And therefore, there always has to be mining, unless we consume less.
Yeah.
And this is like the dirty word that people who are traditional quantitative economists go, oh, what? Don't be so ridiculous. But it is quite a serious school of thought. And it is one that certainly the circles I move in through my husband's academic relationships and our friendships is discussed and considered. And, at the end of the day, we can't really have a just transition if we continue to consume how we consume. So it's not just changing how we build things and how we make things and how we make money out of that. It's also changing what we're consuming and how much we're consuming. And that means as individuals, families, communities, companies, setting some rules for ourselves and, taking on climatarian diets, for example, eating less meat, eating, more vegetables, more vegan proteins, these types of things. So I've gone off, it's bigger than metals, but it's obviously all related.
It's okay, we can go full blown into economics and everything now as well. I mean, so from that, because I mean, of course, the traditional measurements of are we doing well, it's all about growth, GDP, etc. And there are endless conversations around, hang on a second, is that the right measure? And actually the need to totally revamp all of that.
Exactly, which is where donut economics comes in, where well-being metrics. I've got a friend, so in Guernsey where I live, there's a community of us that's been part of some little transition islands founded by a woman, Sasha, I can't say her surname, but she's a good friend of mine, Kavantseva Miller, sorry Sasha, sorry, who's actually become a local politician because she realised that she had to do action. But in transition islands, one of the things we were doing within the business community in Guernsey was trying to advocate for a greater approach to well-being, being at the heart of how we measure corporate success and our contribution to community well-being and island well-being, and pushing the island's government to move from these stale, old-fashioned metrics that incentivize us wrongly into more holistic metrics that are more aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and more likely to deliver the outcomes we need to achieve a just transition and to minimize the harms that we pose every day in the little things that we do.
So if we take, say, for example, we take those metrics and we now then, I'm going to come back into the mining sector again, little segue back.
You can tell it's nearly the weekend and I'm like, off I go.
So this is something here where, so say, for example, we properly started to measure success using, metrics more in line with donut economics, etc., and pull that into mining. Do you think that that would start steering the mining sector in a more sustainable fashion?
So it's all down to what the board sets as their priorities for measuring corporate performance. And of course, we're all very familiar with boards setting all kinds of targets around finances, and that's absolutely necessary and to be expected. And this is where triple bottom line accounting comes in. Are we actually measuring and setting targets and holding companies accountable for how they deliver for people, planet, and profit? So yeah, I really strongly believe that companies should be having these other metrics as part of their overall corporate metrics and cascaded through job descriptions, incentives, bonus schemes, and others for executives, but actually throughout the organization to meet so that people within their jobs think more holistically about their functions in the company and in the economy and in society as a whole. And make time for these other things that aren't just about the finances, that are about leaving positive legacies. Because actually, that's what mining companies really can do. Like, the potential is just so big if they embrace it. So many that I've worked with, I mean, it's just shareholder capitalism, isn't it? Short-termist, it's all about the money. And minimal budgets to actually control risks, minimal budgets to actually deliver on something that will really drive change, not an attitude of opportunity capture in the social environmental development space. Whereas those of us that come from a development background or government partners, that are sitting there going, but what about the nation? And what about what we get out of letting you extract our natural resources? It's not joined up well enough.
So it's almost like the kind of, when we're trying to calculate what is the total value, be it, kind of from a social capital and natural capital, etc. perspective, what does that look like throughout the kind of the whole value chain of that particular patch of land? Because a mining company is just a steward of that land for a short time, really. And do you see, I mean, so Estelle, we're kind of talking about big companies, with boards and that governance structure, etc. What does this look like when you then go into smaller scale mining and artisanal mining?
Well, do you know what? They're already far more part of the community for a start, usually. Even when they're migrant miners that have come in, perhaps, whether it's a large scale mine, they rent homes from local communities, they become part of the community, there may be tensions there. But, artisanal small scale mining, there are many forms of it that are community based mining. And if it's not, it doesn't always deliver on what the community needs. There are often really bad impacts that come with that too. And very often, the people that control and lead that mining can have the same money first attitude and don't really care or think about the legacy. It all comes down to accountability structures. The fact is, in artisanal and small scale mining, the social and political side of how you mine, where you mine, what you mine, who you involve, who benefits from it, and so on, almost becomes more important. So large scale mining companies do it to get the social license to operate. In small scale mining, people are doing it to build social and political capital. So the smallest digger, and I will never forget this woman I met in 2004 when I began working, my first proper experience in research artists and small scale mining in diamonds in Sierra Leone. And I was asking her, why do you do this? Like, why are you, funding a group of artisanal diamond diggers and then washing their tailings for gold and then making soap in the evening and all of the things that she was doing as a widow after the war with various responsibilities, not just for her own children, but other people who'd left, whose children she had to take in. And she said, the reason I'm in diamonds, because diamonds aren't certain. Like, you can mine for 5 months in that part of Sierra Leone at that time and not get anything. I said, why are you taking that risk? She said, because if I find that diamond, I will get respect from the chief. And it was all about the pursuit of dignity.
Right.
No, so like some of these artisanal miners, like they are so degraded in their poverty, but it's about hope and it's about pursuit of dignity. That just stayed with me, and it also is part of the reason I have tremendous compassion and respect for artisanal miners, because they are working hard to achieve these things. So it's not just about the money for them; it's also about political capital and social capital. That's just one example. I could go on forever about that.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that word dignity, I mean, that's so powerful, isn't it? Because I think often people forget that actually that's what a lot of people are driving for. And I mean, again, coming back into the larger scale miners as well, is that actually all of us want to work and do something with dignity. And if we feel, hang on a second, I'm doing this just to make money, dignity kind of, that maybe those two things don't link together. So maybe that's a kind of resounding theme through all of it.
Dignity, values, ethics. Yeah, absolutely.
So with this then, Estelle, and this is then coming back into the question again that we've been asking a number of people here, which is I know that we discussed it briefly before this. So and there is an aspect of dignity and ethics and everything that comes into this. If you, so cobalt, which of course you know all about, you do lots and lots of work with that particular commodity. So cobalt, if you had a choice where you decided, I absolutely need my cobalt, I can either get it from deep sea mining, or I can get it from a 9-year-old somewhere in a unregulated environment, which option do you go for? Deep sea mining or the 9-year-old?
It's a really horrible question, Sarah. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's I think there's different things at stake here. There's different, part of it could come down to your values. You know, there are some people who do put the environment first, and they get the big picture things, and that creates fear for them, and it creates you know, the get systems and how systems interlink, and they understand that by not knowing what we don't know about the deep sea, there are risks we just can't control because we don't know them. And I share their concerns and their fears about this. There are the other end of the value spectrum, of course, is people who do everything they can for every individual, and helping every individual matters. And it's about people. But the thing is, with the child, it's one child, whereas with deep sea mining, it's it could affect so many more people. And coming back to what I said at the very beginning about nature and rights of nature, it certainly poses risks and threats there that I would be uncomfortable with. So much as I'd hate to say it's okay for any one child to have to live that life, I also recognize that and face those hazards, because that's unacceptable and it's illegal for reasons that are absolutely as it should be. You also understand why these children mine. You know, sometimes it's the only way they can pay school fees. Sometimes they're orphaned heads of households. I've met a boy in Uganda. He was 9 years old, actually. He was mining gold, and he had scabby clothes. And like, I asked him, why are you mining? And he said, well, I have to look after my brothers and sisters who are younger. My parents died of HIV, of AIDS. And there wasn't anyone in the community willing or able to look after them. Like, that's, you know, that's an extreme example, but not every child that is in child labor is the same. And so, and sometimes removing children from child labor makes them more at risk of harms. So just to add that nuance and to try and justify what I'm about to say, I would buy it from the child, because I
Okay.
can control the risk there, and I can understand the motivations, the incentives, the reasons, the constraints, and I can put in place things to remove the dangers and the hazards, to perhaps help that child elevate and get out of that situation, so that I no longer would need to source from them.
Yeah.
I think that would be my choice.
Okay. So incredibly difficult choice, and my sincere apologies for putting that on the table, because as we know, ideally we would never get to that point. We should, well, I mean, I say we should never get to that point. We are at that point in some parts of the world. And so I think perhaps that just accentuates the fact that actually that shouldn't be the option that we're looking at. And we either shouldn't need cobalt to go into batteries because we've invented different ways of transferring power, etc. But then also as well, actually the rest of the mining sector has actually made sure that there isn't a place necessarily for that 9-year-old mining that cobalt at that point in time. So there's not a market for that person to do.
And I think, I'm sorry for the background noise, because my 9-year-old is in the house right now and family stuff's going on in the background. I was hoping they'd close the door, but they've not noticed. You know, when you say the mining sector, I want to be really clear that on issues like child labour, it's not just down to the mining companies,
no,
by any means. You know, but when mining companies pay their taxes and pay the amount of taxes they really should be paying, then governments are better equipped to help eliminate the conditions that make child labour more likely to happen in that region. And so, you know, there are things that companies can do that isn't just directly about age verification procedures, having the right policy, you know, creating scholarships for children in schools and things like this, all of which are obviously merited and important. But there are other things that mining companies do that contribute to the creation of the root causes of child labour that are massively important. You know, taking a child rights approach to how they do all of their risk management, you know, paying a living wage, ensuring subcontractors are being paid a living wage, huge when it comes to avoiding child labour, and on and on. So there are things the mining companies can do, but they're not, it's not just on their shoulders. Governments do need to step up, and we have to hold them to account as well, because in many cases they're just not.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Estelle. So accountability, dignity, thinking about that big interconnected picture as well across space and time.
The whole thing, Sarah, because it's so complicated. I had to make it even more complicated.
Fabulous. So I think on that, before we do get seriously complicated, thank you so much, Estelle. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Always lovely to talk to you, Sarah. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.